Welcome to the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. I'm your host, Dr Nat Green, and I'm so excited to have you join me as we discuss what it means to navigate your way through post-traumatic growth and not just survive, but to thrive after trauma. Through our podcast, we will explore ways for you to create a life filled with greater purpose, self-awareness, and a deep inner peace. Through integrating the many years of knowledge and professional experience, as well as the wisdom of those who have experienced trauma firsthand, we will combine psychology, accelerated approaches, coaching, and personal experience to assist you to learn, to grow, and to thrive. I hope to empower you to create deeper awareness and understanding and stronger connections with yourself and with others, whilst also paving the way for those who have experienced trauma and adversity to reduce their suffering and become the very best versions of themselves in order to thrive. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Welcome to Growing Tall Poppies, the podcast where we delve into powerful stories of resilience, growth, and transformation after trauma and adversity. I'm Dr Nat Green, and today, due to illnesses of a couple of my scheduled guests, you're stuck with me for a solo episode. Today, I'm going to discuss a topic that often goes unspoken, but I believe holds immense power over many of us who have faced trauma. And that's around the concept of shame. The hidden impact of shame as a result of trauma is something many people struggle with, and understanding it is crucial to our healing and growth. So let's look a little deeper and explore this together. I'm going to start with defining shame. So shame is a deeply personal and often isolating emotion. It's that inner voice that tells us that we're flawed, unworthy, or somehow bad, that there is something really wrong with us. For those of us who have experienced trauma, shame can be particularly intense and persistent. It's not just about what happened to us, it's about how we perceive ourselves in the aftermath. So today we're going to unpack how shame is connected to trauma and why it's so important to address it in our journey towards post-traumatic growth. Let's start by acknowledging a renowned researcher and author who I'm a massive fan of, and that is Brené Brown. She has had a huge impact in my world and hugely influenced a lot of what I do and how I show up in the world. She has extensively studied shame, vulnerability, and empathy. Brené Brown defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. She differentiates shame from guilt, noting that guilt is feeling bad about something we have done, whereas shame is feeling bad about who we are. This distinction is important because shame strikes at the core of our identity, of who we perceive we are. When trauma occurs, especially in cases of abuse, neglect, or violence, it often leaves us feeling tainted or broken in some fundamental way. She also identified that shame is an emotion that often drives people to hide or mask their true selves, leading to a myriad of mental health issues. Now we're going to look at the roots of shame in trauma. Shame can stem from various sources related to trauma. It might come from society's stigmas, cultural norms, or the reactions of those around us. So, for example, a survivor of sexual assault may feel shame because of some attitudes in society that blame victims rather than the perpetrators. No doubt we've all seen or heard those horrific comments like, well, she asked for it because of how she dressed, or she shouldn't have been walking alone late at night. A person who has experienced domestic violence might feel ashamed also because they believe they should have left sooner or not allowed the incident to happen. These thoughts, while completely unfounded, are powerful and extremely intrusive, and most definitely pervasive and really hard to shake. Another source of shame can be the messages we receive during our trauma. Abusers often manipulate their victims into believing that they are at fault or that they deserve the mistreatment. This can lead to an internalized sense of worthlessness and of shame that persists long after the trauma has ended. And additionally, trauma can create a sense of betrayal, either by others or by our own bodies, leading us to develop a fractured sense of self and an overwhelming feeling of shame as a result. I know myself that when working for years with sexual assault survivors, this was a very common occurrence. They often blame themselves for their inability to fight back, their body's responses to the situation, their inability to speak out about what had happened, and their inability to press charges and go to court. And if any of these were going on, then they carried many layers of shame as a result of their experiences. Shame that was never theirs to own, but that developed regardless. Now I want to look at the impact of shame on healing. The impact of shame on our healing journey simply cannot be overstated. Shame does a great job in keeping us silent, isolated, and stuck. And unfortunately, it tends to work hand in hand with the perpetrator in so many ways, in that it can prevent us from seeking help, connecting with others, and engaging in activities that promote healing. It's kind of like an anchor, weighing us down and holding us back from moving forward. And when we turn that shame on ourselves, so when we internalize that shame, which we usually do, blaming ourselves and seeing ourselves as defective, that further affects our mental health, our relationships, and our overall well-being. So as you know from previous episodes, my initial major trauma stemmed from when I had a complex surgery that resulted in systemic infections, and my recovery was long and slow. Shame took many forms in the years of recovery afterwards, as I oscillated between understanding that my healing would take a long time, to regularly hearing comments from well-meaning colleagues and professionals offering their advice and recommendations, often wondering why I hadn't just put things behind me and moved on. Others who had major injuries and were able to recover and get back to jogging and sports as usual. They often commented and wondered why I didn't try harder. This really contributed more and more to my sense of shame. I know for me, I felt considerable shame on multiple levels after this, namely that I was still experiencing significant pain, frustration at my inability to recover, and physically engage in my usual activities. Further levels of shame that I had to rely on my hubby so much and that he had to take on such a huge load at home. And that I felt that as a psychologist, I should have all the answers and be able to move on, feel better, and keep showing up for my clients as I had always done. I felt further shame as a result of the messages I was getting from others that I could really relate to. I just kept on going, putting on that mask and showing up every day for my clients, focusing on them and avoiding dealing with what was really happening for me. I felt further shame when I thought of my clients having gone through some of the most awful things and horrific experiences, yet they were doing their best to move on, and I kept comparing myself to them, which just served to create more shame within me. I piled on the weight, and there was significant shame in how I felt, how I looked, and how I therefore presented myself in the world. And I simply wasn't game to tell people how I really felt. of my significant physical pain and the emotional turmoil. And as a result, I went to a really dark place at one point. I kept all of that hidden and stayed silent and isolated, keeping to myself. I wasn't able to maintain my leadership capacity at work. I couldn't step up as I'd always done. And I felt those layers of shame as a parent, a wife, a friend, and a psychologist. Then there was the added layer of the professional board and feeling I had to stay silent and not acknowledge what was happening for fear of those repercussions of that. If I was seen as having an impairment and could lose my right to practice. There was immense pressure from multiple angles to stay silent and quash my feelings and what was really happening for fear of being seen as weak and broken. So instead, my shame was compounded and my silence and isolation kept me well and truly stuck in my trauma and my pain. But here's the good news. Shame can be overcome. By understanding its origins and its effects, we can start to pull it apart and really dismantle it. One of the first steps in this process is breaking the silence, talking about our experiences in a safe and supportive environment. This can really help us realize that we are not alone. Sharing our stories, whether with a therapist, in a support group, even with a trusted friend, can be incredibly liberating and healing. This podcast is one further avenue to help us share our stories and to normalize our experiences to help us feel less isolated and alone. So Brené Brown also emphasizes the importance of vulnerability in overcoming shame. She argues that vulnerability is absolutely not a weakness, and I totally agree, but rather a path to courage and connection. Embracing our vulnerability can lead to more authentic and meaningful relationships. So this podcast is absolutely a platform to assist us in being vulnerable and more authentic in sharing our stories at a deeper level and in normalizing the true impacts of trauma. So now I want to look at some strategies for overcoming shame. How do we begin to overcome the shame associated with trauma? Here are some strategies that can help you to move beyond trauma and into post-traumatic growth that are very specific to shame. Number one, acknowledge and validate your feelings. It's important to recognize that shame is a natural response to trauma. Acknowledge and validate your feelings without the judgment of self and judgment from others. Understand that feeling ashamed does not mean you are shameful. Identify and acknowledge your shame triggers. Understand that shame is a common human experience, and this in itself can reduce its power. Number two, challenge negative beliefs. So identify and challenge the negative beliefs that you hold about yourself. Replace them with a more compassionate and realistic thought. So for example, instead of thinking, I am weak for being affected by this, try replacing this with, I am strong for surviving and seeking healing. It's also really important to challenge societal norms. Societies and cultural expectations contribute to shame in so many ways. So it's really helpful to engage in critical thinking around these norms to really identify whether they are yours to own or can be dismissed. Number three, building a support network. Surround yourself with people who understand and support you. This could be friends, family, support groups, or mental health professionals. A supportive network can provide the empathy and the understanding needed to really start to combat shame. Number four, engage with people with empathy. Empathy is a powerful antidote to shame, and empathy is imperative in our healing. So when we share our shame experiences with someone who responds with empathy, it helps us to feel understood and less isolated. Empathy involves listening without judgment, validating our emotions, and connecting through shared humanity. So seek supportive relationships where you can share your feelings without fear of judgment. Number 5, practice self-compassion. Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a trusted and very good friend. Self-compassion is a crucial component of shame resilience. Self-compassion involves being gentle with yourself during times of difficulty and recognizing your inherent worthiness. So for more information around self-compassion, you can check out our self-compassion challenge, which I'll add the link for in the show notes if you want to get started on that. It's a really valuable tool and process to start to learn about self-compassion and how to activate it within our own lives. Number 6, engage in therapeutic activities. There are various therapies that can assist you in moving through the impacts of shame and trauma. Therapies such as TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, which we introduced to you in the last podcast episode. TRE is great in moving things through our nervous system that have become stuck and reintegrating our nervous systems. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is also a powerful tool. And mindfulness practices can also be incredibly effective in addressing the emotional and physiological effects of shame and trauma. Number 7, cultivate vulnerability and share your story. It is so important to be vulnerable and open about our experiences. Sharing our stories of resilience can inspire others and foster a sense of community. So when you're ready, sharing your story can be a really powerful way to reclaim your narrative and to reduce the power of shame in your life. This doesn't mean you have to share it publicly. Even private journaling can be beneficial. However, if you are ready to share in a more public forum, then feel free to reach out to me about becoming a guest on our podcast. I would love to have you and share your story to help you heal and move towards post-traumatic growth and allow you to inspire others to do that in their lives. Now, I know I've made reference throughout today's episode around Brené Brown. She has some amazing books and resources which can be really helpful if you want to do any further reading. I'll also put them in the show notes. There's 4 main books that I love. Daring Greatly, which explores how embracing vulnerability can transform our lives and combat the effects of shame. Then there's The Gifts of Imperfection, which encourages readers to let go of who they think they're supposed to be and embrace their true selves. Another one I love is I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't. This focuses on women's experiences with shame and provides strategies for building shame resilience. And the 4th one is Rising Strong. This discusses the process of rising from our falls, owning our stories, and using them to grow and build resilience. So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. Shame thrives in secrecy and silence, but it diminishes in the light of understanding and connection. So remember that your experiences do not define you. It's how you choose to heal and grow that shapes your journey. And as we continue our path towards post-traumatic growth, let's commit to being kinder to ourselves, engaging in self-compassion, challenging the shame that is holding us back, and really supporting each other in our shared journey of healing. You are not alone, and you truly are deserving of all the love and support you need to thrive. Thank you for joining me today on Growing Tall Poppies. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who you feel might benefit from it. And as always, I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Feel free to reach out through our social media channels or my website. So together we can grow and flourish despite the scars of our past. Until next time, take care and keep shining your light brightly in the world. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Growing Tall Poppies. It is my deepest hope that today's episode may have inspired and empowered you to step fully into your post-traumatic growth so that you can have absolute clarity around who you are, what matters the most to you, and to assist you to release your negative emotions and regulate your nervous system so you can fully thrive. New episodes are published every Tuesday, and I hope you'll continue to join us as we explore both the strategies and the personal qualities required to fully live a life of post-traumatic growth and to thrive. So if it feels aligned to you and really resonates, then I invite you to hit subscribe, and it would mean the world to us if you could share this episode with others who you feel may benefit too. You may also find me on Instagram at Growing Tall Poppies and Facebook, Dr. Natalie Green. Remember, every moment is an opportunity to look for the lessons and to learn and increase your ability to live the life you desire and deserve. So for now, stay connected, stay inspired, stand tall like the tall poppy you are, and keep shining your light brightly in the world. Bye for now.